you'd be shocked and surprised, Dev, at how advanced Iranian weaponry is. Don't believe bullshit propaganda by countries that say Iran is some pariah that doesn't know what it's doing and it builds, third-rate weapons and they don't know what they're doing and they're a bunch of idiots sitting in some desert. They're not. For the kind of country it is, for the kind of threats it has faced, it has pretty formidable technology. It has long range attack drones which even India doesn't have. Whether it is Hamas, whether it is Hezbollah, and most certainly Iran, they know that Israel enjoys very difficult to penetrate layers of air defense. When I was in Israel last year, for instance, covering the war, I was in a city called Ashkelon, which is just north of Gaza, and this was shortly after October the 7th, after the initial attack, and this was while the Hamas still had quite a fighting capability, and there was a rocket attack on the city where I was at, and I remember, and we had this on camera and we filmed it. It was like a huge barrage of rockets. Hundreds of rockets in the air at the same time, and all cities in Israel are protected by the Iron Dome, and many Iron Domes, obviously, Iron Dome interceptors got activated, and it was that familiar view that everyone sees in pictures of, you hear the thud of the interceptions taking place. But many of those rockets did land in the city, which is why we were all rushed into bunkers, and which is that if you've got a nuclear warhead screaming towards you, then you've already crossed the line of shit, should I shoot it down in the air or should I wait till it hits Chandni Chowk? If and when something comes at us, we have the technology, the intelligence and the sensors to be able to give us an advanced sense of whether it's nuclear or non-nuclear. You're right, it's a very important issue about your ballistic missile defense system taking down a nuclear weapon, but the priority will always be to make sure the damn thing doesn't hit your land.
Hello and welcome to another episode of InOurDefence. Shiv, it's been 42 episodes now. I remember, especially this week, I remember the first episode we did on season 2 of InOurDefence, where we brought you in, and I thought, we kind of looked at the 3 major conflicts that we were facing to kind of give an overview, because we knew that we'd be mostly covering these conflicts during the course of the show. So you obviously had the India-China ongoing standoff for the last 4 years. You had the Russia-Ukraine war around 2 years, and you had the Israel-Hamas war, which back then was a few months into it. And now, as we record this episode, 42nd episode, we are close to a year, just a few days left, actually, in fact, to that conflict starting. The reason I remember that episode is because I think towards the end, I had asked you about whether do you see this possibility of sort of a world war scenario happening, and you had kind of, not corrected me per se, but you basically said that, Dave, if this already isn't a world conflict, then what is? And you had said this back then. We are 42 weeks from then, and in the middle of, I would really say, a world conflict. We're recording this episode 2 days after Iran fired around 200 missiles towards Israel. Most of them were shot down with the help of the US. You have all these powers involved in this region. So I would truly say it's a world conflict. And this question that I think a lot of people are asking on social media, or anchors asking on news shows, I think it's quite moot. We won't focus on that, though, on this episode. We'll focus on the attack and sort of the equipment and apparatus used, one, to launch the attack and to thwart it. Because that's what we do in our defense, not to glorify conflict, but to just look at how these weapons of destruction end up being used in real world when they are used. The reason we're choosing this attack is the claim by Iran that they have used for the first time in conflict their Fattah missile, which they claim to be a supersonic ballistic missile.
Hypersonic, yeah.
Sorry, hypersonic ballistic missile. I have some questions and queries I want to ask you about that, but we'll get to that a bit later. First, I want to talk about hypersonic missiles. We've briefly touched upon this topic during our episode on BrahMos, where we spoke about how BrahMos 2, the sort of under development project, which will target a hypersonic cruise missile. Uh, so while preparing for this episode, I was looking at hypersonic missiles, supersonic missiles, and honestly, it's quite a fascinating topic actually. If you look at the tech behind it, especially the sort of engines that are used, and this I almost went into this black hole where I looked up turboprop engines, and then I looked up ramjet engines, and I looked up scramjet engines,
Yeah.
and it's just very cool it seemed. So let us take us to the concept of a hypersonic missile. Obviously, by the name, everyone would have guessed it flies at speeds faster than the speed of sound. But talk us to this concept of a hypersonic missile and especially the tech behind it.
So the reason why that we're talking about hypersonic missiles on this episode is because obviously, like you said, amidst that huge number of missiles that Iran launched into Israel, a couple of nights ago from when we're recording, at least some of those missiles are said to have been hypersonic missiles, and there is good reason to believe that is true, and we'll come to that in just a moment. Of the missile is called the Fattah 2. Fattah 1 and Fattah 2 are both hypersonic missiles. Now, hypersonic, as you touched upon it, basically denotes a certain degree of speed that the missile can attain. Supersonic denotes anything that's faster than sound. Hypersonic is any weapon or projectile that can travel in excess of 5 times the speed of sound. Now, the speed of sound is measured by a measure called Mach. So anything in excess of 5 Mach is said to be in a hypersonic domain and traveling at hypersonic speed. So any hypersonic weapon is basically something that at some point in its flight attains speeds in excess of 5 times the speed of sound. The Fattah 2 missile it's not a secret weapon of Iran's. It's been known to exist for a very long time. There are images and videos of it on the internet quite a bit. But this is at least as per expert observers, the Iranian media, and those obsessed with weapons around the world and who watch these things very, very closely. They say this is the first time a Fattah 2 missile has been used in anger, quote unquote, in anger, as they say, which is to say in combat. In the context of Iran and Israel, you couldn't find a more angry way of demonstrating this missile than firing it at Israel. Iran and Israel are each other's nemesis in the region. They wish each other's destruction, even though they don't admit it. And Iran is a country that unlike its proxies like the Hezbollah or the Hamas or the Houthis in Yemen, Iran is not only a geographically big country, but it's also a country with a large military, conventional military. It's a country that also has nuclear capabilities, though it doesn't yet have a nuclear weapon. But the country may not be far from that. We'll get to how hypersonic technology relates to nuclear a little later. But so basically, there are the reason why hypersonic weapons are of immediate interest to us on this episode, as well as in general, is because not only because Iran has used a hypersonic weapon in this fight, but also because there currently is among the superpowers of the world, there is an arms race going on in the field of hypersonic weapons. Hypersonic weapons are not currently regulated by any treaties. They are not governed by any oversight. There are no bilateral or multilateral agreements between countries that usually limit the capabilities or numbers of such missiles that can be held by member countries, and therefore it's a bit of a scary free-for-all as far as hypersonic technology is concerned. And we'll talk, of course, about where China stands, where India stands, etc. But hypersonic weapons are basically designed to be moving at speeds at 5 times faster than sound. But it isn't just their speed that is their advantage, Dev. It is the fact that at those speeds and the kind of technology that they use, these missiles are basically capable of being extremely agile. They are capable of exiting and re-entering the atmosphere uh, as per the country that is firing them, and therefore their USP, their main flagship quality is that they are virtually uninterceptable by air defense systems currently. Even in the Israeli example that we're talking about right now, Israel has some of the world's most advanced air defense systems, multi-layered air defense systems, but it is unlikely that any of these missiles that were coming in were intercepted by sheer virtue of their speed, their ability to maneuver in a big way, their ability to fly at pretty low altitudes, therefore evade detection. So that's what hypersonic technology is really about. It's about taking one step ahead of existing anti-missile and air defense capabilities. Therefore, you build a shield, I'll build a spear that can penetrate even that shield. So that's what hypersonic is now, the spear that can penetrate any current shield in existence.
Right. So, help me understand the ballistic aspect of it, because that is the one part where I got really confused when I was making the notes for what we want to discuss on this episode. Because I recalled our previous conversation when we spoke about cruise missiles, especially the BrahMos episode, where you'd kind of drawn this distinction between a ballistic missile that kind of goes out into space, or at least exits the atmosphere, and then, sort of takes a parabolic route and then kind of uses gravity to come back and hit a target in a particular country, whereas cruise missiles are almost like hugging the surface of the earth, like you said, and they fly like almost like a sort of a fighter jet. But however much I could read about hypersonic missiles, and not much by the way, because like you rightly said, this is still something that is almost like work in progress almost everywhere, whether it's US, Russia, India, China, etc. They seem to be a mix of both. So you interestingly mentioned in your answer right now maneuverability, that they can they are very fast moving, and they can easily kind of change track and directions, etc. So how do these two aspects of warfare, when it comes to missiles, cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, how do they come together when it comes to hypersonic missiles?
So that's a very good question, because it can get a little confusing. Think of the hypersonic missile as a missile within a missile,
Okay.
or as the warhead. Think of the hypersonic missile as the second phase of the missile, and I'll break this down, and I'll simplify it even further. When this missile is being built, you're basically taking the hypersonic weapon and you are housing it inside a ballistic missile. Okay, there are different kinds of hypersonic weapons, but let's take the most common variety, which is a hypersonic ballistic missile. Now, it basically involves two missiles. There's a ballistic missile, which is basically the mothership. Inside it is this little baby hypersonic weapon. Okay, what this hypersonic weapon does is it's completely inert inside that missile. The ballistic missile is launched, it takes off, which is the boost phase of the missile, gets it up to a certain altitude, ejects, it basically spits out the hypersonic warhead, which is called the glide vehicle in this example that we're taking. And then the glide vehicle takes over, and the ballistic part of the missile basically just falls away to the earth. It's like, if this reminds you of a satellite launch or a space launch, it's almost identical to that in theory, except that in this particular case, the hypersonic component, which is the warhead, then takes over and becomes the lead edge of the weapon. Right. It then takes over, and that becomes the component that the guy sitting on the ground or the girl sitting on the ground is then able to guide towards its target. Once it's in the air, the ballistic part falls away. That's useless now. That's basically gotten the hypersonic baby to the altitude that it needs to go. That part falls away. It becomes useless, can be recovered later. And then you've got this hypersonic vehicle, which can be accelerated to its hypersonic speeds. It can exit the atmosphere. It can re-enter the atmosphere. It can be guided. It can be maneuvered in different directions. And then it can be flown towards the target. So it's basically like a little aircraft, a blindingly fast aircraft housed inside a ballistic missile that's boosted up to a certain altitude, and then it becomes its own thing. and that's what you're remote controlling practically towards the target. The reason why this is completely different from a ballistic missile, and I'm glad you asked that question, is because in a ballistic missile, but for other kinds of technology which we've spoken about in the past, like multiple independently guidable vehicles, a ballistic missile only has a certain circular area that it can target. And we're talking about normal ballistic missiles, not the Agni type. But in this particular case, the ballistic missile has done its job just by getting the hypersonic warhead to a certain altitude. After that, your flexibility explodes because you have basically a terribly fast aircraft on your hands, which can be turned in different directions. You can select different other targets. It has a radius of attack that is much vaster than any kind of ballistic missile, and it has the speed and agility to evade air defense shields, which is the most important thing. When we talk about hypersonic, because of the name hypersonic, which is sexy, one tends to think that it's because of the speed alone that it is able to evade air defense and penetrate anti-missile shields. It's not only because of the speed. I mean, speed is one part of it, of course. You can't deny that. But it's also its ability to evade, its ability to be very, very agile, unlike a ballistic missile, much more agile than a cruise missile. The maneuverability and agility in the air means that it is able to evade air defense and interceptors that may be coming at it. It can evade radar. It's tricky to pin down because of its speed. And therefore, by the time ground systems and air defense shields get a fix on it, it's hit its target. That's where the speed becomes a virtue. So that's what a ballistic hypersonic missile is really about. It's a little bit of a misleading nomenclature because one tends to think, okay, fine, it's a ballistic missile. So how can a ballistic missile become hypersonic, right? Because a ballistic missile is basically a rocket-powered missile. So that part doesn't change. That's very much the same ballistic missile that all of us think about it as, except that it's spitting out a hypersonic warhead, which then becomes its own weapon and then goes towards the target.
Yeah, that's pretty cool tech, I must say. And I'm actually glad I asked this question because that clears up so many questions and doubts I had. For example, for our listeners and viewers, if you just Google images of hypersonic missiles, you'll be very confused because you'll have one set of images where you see something. Just look at the Fattah photos, for example, where you have a missile that sort of has a cone of almost like a bullet train, like sort of a very sloping sort of a cone. And then you also have images of, the normal cylindrical conical missile. So I could not get my head around ki to kahan hai missile. And I'm guessing now I understand actually that missile was probably inside that cylinder conical thingy. That's the actual ballistic part of the missile.
Because during launch you can't see the hypersonic part. It's housed inside. The fairings basically come off and then this gets pushed out.
Right. So pretty cool tech, which is where I'll circle back to what I said at the beginning of this episode. When Iran claims to have developed such piece of technology, when Iran claims to have had this missile since a year and a half, I think 2023 is when it kind of told the world that, we've developed this missile. You've said that, experts sort of agree that there is this missile, and experts also agree this missile was kind of used in this round of attack. But there's also a very vocal group of experts who say that Iran also tends to exaggerate its abilities, exaggerate what it has. And forget all of that. That is going into expert territory. That is also going into the territory of people who really follow this world. Let's talk about people, just like lay people. To most of them, Iran is not a sort of a country who would be at the cutting edge of missile technology, just like the looks of it. You'd think of countries like the US, countries like China, countries like Russia. They'd be the ones developing this, this new piece of technology that is the next frontier in missile development, missile tech. Iran, you would not think that would be the case because most people think of Iran as sort of a country which kind of either steals or kind of back engineers technology that has already been developed by other countries. So in all of this, where do you stand and what do you have to tell us based on what you've read about Iran's actual capabilities of developing
You'd be shocked and surprised, Dev, at how advanced Iranian weaponry is. Don't believe bullshit propaganda by countries that say Iran is some pariah that doesn't know what it's doing and it builds, third-rate weapons and they don't know what they're doing and they're a bunch of idiots sitting in some desert. They're not. The very fact that Iran has been, in many ways, diplomatically isolated since the 1970s after its conflict with the United States and Iraq, etc., has meant that Iran has and see, this is what I like about InOurDefence, right? We don't mess around. We call it like it is. Iran has had the unique distinction of having no choice but to develop its weapons by itself.
Right.
Okay. Yes, Iran has had a friend in Russia. Yes, Iran has had some other friends, including China. But for the large part of its journey since the 60s, 70s, Iran has had to develop weapons by itself. Of course, there was Russian help, and this was important Russian help. But it's not like it was, it had a steady pipeline of any kind of technology that it needed. So Iran has, for the kind of country it is, for the kind of threats it has faced, it has pretty formidable technology. It has long range attack drones, which even India doesn't have. Okay. It has long range surveillance drones, which even India hasn't developed. It has all kinds of aerial vehicles that India does not have. It has perforce built, long range missiles of this kind. Yes, with Russian help. That India does not have. I mean, we'll come to India's hypersonic program in a moment. Yes. But we are sitting here and talking about a country that has just fired hypersonic missiles at its almost like a biblical adversary. And this is a country that has done it in a combat scenario and pushing the world even closer to the possibility of a greater, wider kind of war. So by no means is Iran a country, nobody should make this mistake of thinking of Iran as not having the capacity to build credible weapons. Because, look, at the end of the day, a weapon is only as effective as what it can do in the battlefield. You don't need fancy brochures and Instagram accounts to show how shiny a weapon can be. The United States does that very well, and there's no discounting how capable American weapons are. They are the best in the world. They are the top of the line weapons. There's no doubt about it. But there's also much to be said about the public relations about weapons. And ultimately, look at it this way: the Fattah 2 missile that the Iranians developed themselves, obviously with some Russian help. Satellite images show that some of them did impact Israeli air bases. Yes. There can be no bigger demonstration than that. I'm not commenting on the morality of war because, like you rightly said at the start, this podcast does not glorify combat or war. But the fact that a weapon capability of that kind, a hypersonic weapon, has been used in anger against your biggest adversary shows that Iran definitely has a missile capability. And believe me, its missile program is an extensive one. It's a deep and extensive one that goes back many decades. And they're constantly looking at the next kind of capability. And one final point on this question, Dave, is just if you boil away all the claims and counterclaims that are being made, if you remove all the propaganda and all the psychological mind games that are being played between Iran and Israel right now, the bottom line right now is that Iran fired its most capable missile at Israel, and Israel's most advanced air defense system, at least in some measure, failed to stop those missiles. That is the message that has gone out to the world, and it basically says that no matter how advanced an air defense shield, no matter how advanced an anti-missile bubble around a country or a facility or an airbase or a city, there are weapons out there that can penetrate them. Yep. And that's a big message.
Yeah, especially because in the aftermath of this episode, of this incident, I also came across this term saturation attack, where basically you just shoot so many missiles that you just need that one missile to kind of be able to penetrate the defenses of their defense systems, because they'll be able to take down many, but you won't be able to perhaps take down all, which I think is what happened in this case. They shot around 190, 200 odd missiles, and a few did end up hitting a few places here and there in Israel. Uh, we'll come to the part about the defenses. We'll come to the part about what may have actually gone down that night, because that also is pretty interesting. It happened within a span of, I think, around 3 to 4 hours. I remember that very clearly because it happened from the moment I left office to the moment I kind of was about to fall asleep, and then I just saw, okay, this is, erupted into a massive conflict. But staying on the topic of hypersonic missiles, so, okay, we've talked about Iran. One of the reasons I also asked that previous question was when I searched about what other countries are doing with hypersonic missiles, I couldn't find a lot of information because, again, I'm guessing because a lot of these programs are still under development, some of them are even at a theoretical stage. I think the US is kind of exploring some new piece of propulsion system that is a bit more advanced than the scramjet system, but again, that's very, very specific. You give us an overview of what's out there in the world when it comes to US, Russia, China, and of course, India.
So the most recent demonstrations of this capability, apart from the Iran Fattah 2 missile that we saw fired a couple of days ago into Israel, is the Kinjal hypersonic ballistic missile. It's an air-launched ballistic missile that Russia has been using in Ukraine. There are at least 5 or 6 known cases in which this missile that is fired from a fighter jet has been fired at Ukrainian targets. So we definitely live in an era of a hypersonic weapon war. Russia has used them. Iran has used them. There are a whole host of countries that already have or are developing these weapons. The country that is acknowledged to be in the lead in this domain, and this is actually pretty bad news, is China. Okay. Even the United States. I mean, this is one of the few domains, Dave. The US usually is considered top of the line when it comes to any kind of weapon you can think of, whether it comes to air-to-air missiles, surface-to-air missiles, air-to-ground weaponry, radars, electronics, aircraft carriers, submarines, rifles, whatever kind of weapon you can, drones, obviously, any kind of weapon you can think of, the United States defense industry is by and large number one in anybody's list in terms of capability. Hypersonic weapons is that one incredible little area of weapons, missiles, where even the United States sort of acknowledges that they're a couple of steps behind China. Wow. Which is insane because getting into the reasons would require a whole another episode. But the truth of the matter is that the United States has, for good reason, been concentrating for so many years on all of its other kinds of weaponry, which are, and this has not been an error of judgment of any kind. It just so happens that because of that, they did not focus enough on hypersonic weaponry. Now they are in a position where they're playing catch up with China. In 2021, China tested a hypersonic weapon, which was basically a kind of ship killer, a hypersonic missile that can take down an aircraft carrier, which is a mind-blowing weapon because what it basically suggests is that America's nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, their most symbolic projectors of strength and force across the world. There's no greater sort of symbol of American power and muscle than an aircraft carrier like the Nimitz. Now, if one hypersonic missile can completely cripple an aircraft carrier, it completely changes the game as far as what those aircraft carriers can bring to a fight and how much power they can project on an enemy. China has started testing weapons of that kind in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And those tests have been taken so seriously that you had a US chief of the general staff actually call it a bit of a Sputnik moment. Now, a Sputnik moment, is, as most people know, is a 1950s moment when Russia proved to be capable of being part of the space race and to match the United States when they launched the Sputnik satellite into space at a time when the US was saying Russia does not have any capability to do anything in space, and then they had a satellite in space overnight. It was crazy. It was called the Sputnik moment. The US actually called China's 2021 test a Sputnik moment, which basically means they're acknowledging that they were caught off guard. They had no idea that China had the capability to demonstrate this level of hypersonic technology, and they were also acknowledging that the US is currently playing catch up. So China has these weapons, and it is probably safe to assume that if Iran has already started using this kind of weaponry, these weapons are already, there in the Chinese arsenal. Many of these weapons are going to be nuclear capable. We have to assume that these weapons will be nuclear capable, which basically means that your 2 decades of anti-missile, anti-ballistic missile technology, which is basically designed to intercept nuclear missiles from your enemy country, are theoretically rendered useless at one level if your enemy country, in this case China, has a nuclear-tipped hypersonic weapon that's going to make chopped liver out of your anti-ballistic missile system. It's going to just swat it out of the way and penetrate and hit. So then what do you do? So it's become perhaps an even more dangerous arms race that the kind of ballistic missile arms race, the ICBM, the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Arms Race between the US and Russia during the Cold War, the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. The hypersonic weapon race is much scarier than that, because when superpowers like the US and Russia were competing for dominance in nuclear-powered, nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles, treaties were signed. Limits were imposed on countries. There were certain ranges to which they could not develop weapons. All that kind of stuff happened. There is no treaty right now governing hypersonic weapons. There's no treaty governing whether you can put nuclear warheads on hypersonic weapons or not. So China is kind of the acknowledged boss right now when it comes to these weapons. But other countries are developing them as well. France has a program. Japan is said to have a program. India, like I said, has a program which it is testing in 2020. When you asked me about how it works, and I told you it's a ballistic missile that takes off and then spits out the hypersonic vehicle. India conducted its first test in 2019, and then in 2020, it conducted another test of it in 2023 as well. So India also has these. India has a program because India recognizes that hypersonic weapons is going to be a domain where the next, the next kind of space arms race is going to happen in where it's already happening, in fact. Yeah. So it's just a matter of time before more and more countries get into it.
Yeah. Wow, man. When I thought we'd do this episode, I thought it'd be kind of, sort of fun and talk about cool tech and futuristic technology. And it got pretty dark pretty soon.
No, there's good tech. There's a lot of excellent tech in this. But yeah, ultimately we're talking about weapons that can destroy whole cities. So yeah, there's always going to be darkness in this.
Right. Cool. We'll get to the part about what happened this week, actually, in terms of how the Iran attack was thwarted by Israel and with the help of the US, but after a quick break.
So in a war that is anyways, very ruinous, very pointless, Hezbollah ended up killing 12 of its own children. And yet the country is mourning the death of him, of its leader. Of course, though for us it might be in black and whites, but I'm just saying, what are the grays here?
Everything is grey. There is no black and white. Mm-hmm. For one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, right?
Yeah.
The reason why UN has never been able to come to a consensus on the definition of terrorism. Mm. There is no consensus, Anna, at the United Nations, in even defining terrorism, because one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. How many people have died under Israeli missiles and bombs? Are we calling Netanyahu a terrorist?
Exactly, yeah.
No, I'm not saying I agree with what Hassan Nasrallah did or was, but I'm just saying that there's an ideological warfare, there's a political warfare, and a lot of it has to do with the politics of the land.
Right.
So let's not forget what the basis of this entire crisis is. It is the fact that the Palestinians have lost a lot since the creation of Israel. And there has to be a solution. And that solution can only come with a two-state solution. But I don't think with what's happening right now and with the high that Israel is seeing, that they'd be willing to. Because should they agree, they will have to go back to their erstwhile map. After taking so many areas, taking over so much of land and creating their own settlements there, will Israel go back? I don't know whether there should have been a Hezbollah to fight Hamas Palestinian war. But look how they crippled Palestinians. Why was Mahmoud Abbas, who was supposed to be the political voice and face, was undermined to create a Hamas in Gaza and think you're okay with that? Who was paying the Hamas government? Who was sending aid to the Hamas government? Israel. So you undermined a political voice, you created a monster, and now you're having to deal with it. And then you question. So I'm saying there's so much of grey in West Asia that there is no black or white.
Welcome back. Shiv and I are talking about hypersonic missiles, hypersonic ballistic missiles that we've spent the first half discussing, talking about kind of understanding the cool technology that goes behind it. Shiv has given a very nice sort of description of what this missile tech is all about, especially how it deals when it deals with the ballistic aspect of missile technology, and how it should be taken for granted that these missiles will be armed, can be armed with nuclear warheads. Because I think in our previous episode as well, you had said that almost any sort of modern day delivery system when it comes to missiles can be swapped with a nuclear warhead, because a warhead is a warhead at the end of the day. We were talking about it in the context of Iran firing around 200 missiles into Israel after Israel opened an offensive against the Hezbollah, which is backed by the Iran in Lebanon. Of those 200, we don't know how many missiles were taken down, but to a large extent, let's say 99% of the attack was more or less thwarted. There have been no deaths. There have been no, I think, injuries either. There hasn't been much major infrastructural damage. Like you said, there have been some satellite imagery of one Israeli airbase. There has been a hole over there or some sort of damage, but not much. What we know is that Israel's missile defense system, and remember, this was not just the Iron Dome, by the way, which is the most, I think, when you talk about Israel's missile defense, everyone just goes to talk about that. You also had what even I read about it for one of the first times was the Aroor missile defense system and the David Sling missile defense system. You also had some US warships helping taking down some of these missiles. In fact, Nasir, I don't know if you came across this. Some people were joking about this fact that one of the warship involved was the USS Cole, which apparently had been targeted by Yemeni rebels a few years ago.
In 2000, in fact.
Yes, in 2000.
And 18 sailors were killed in that attack. It was an Al-Qaeda attack.
Attack, yes. So people on the internet were kind of saying this was like a sweet moment of revenge, sort of, for that warship. Anyway, coming back to the night of attack. I want to understand from you what you understand of what may have gone down, because and this is sort of the perfect so what happened that night is perfect for like conspiracy theorists, because it was almost like a synchronized operation. You had first a flash coming in on Reuters and other news agencies that the White House in the US has intelligence that Iran is preparing to launch missiles into Israel. A few moments later, you had the Israeli military spokesperson saying that our air defenses are on high alert and we are ready to do whatever. And then you had Iran actually firing those missiles. Yeah. So I think over a span of 4 hours, you had intel somehow, or maybe there has been also talk that there was some warning given in some form or the other through various diplomatic channels. Anyway, you can obviously speculate on that. So you had this happening over a course of 5 hours. Briefly talk about what the lead up to the actual missile firing, and then let's talk about what happened during that actual barrage of missile firing. What systems may have gotten activated, how much of it was manual, how much was it of it was automated, and how did the combination of Israel and US manage to take down most of these missiles?
So there's very good reason to believe, Dev, that Israel had some advance intelligence that this kind of attack was coming. There's almost zero probability that Israel was caught completely off guard like a deer in the headlights, because Israel, of course, has human intelligence on the ground in Iran. They would have had intelligence from the CIA and the United States telling them about this attack happening. In fact, there are even news reports suggesting that the US had told Israel to be prepared for this kind of attack. And there may have been notifications even from the ground that this kind of attack was going to happen. So it's not like Israel suddenly, on the evening of that day, suddenly saw these lights in the air and scrambled to get its weapons going. It's not like that at all. They were prepared for this kind of thing. Two, remember that Israel's adversaries are keenly aware that Israel has some of the best anti-missile and air defense systems in the world. Probably, apart from the United States, probably the best in the world. And whether it is Hamas, whether it is Hezbollah, and most certainly Iran, they know that Israel enjoys very difficult to penetrate layers of air defense. When I was in Israel last year, for instance, covering the war, I was in a city called Ashkelon, which is just north of Gaza, and this was shortly after October the 7th, after the initial attack, and this was while the Hamas still had quite a fighting capability, and there was a rocket attack on the city where I was at, and I remember, and we had this on camera and we filmed it. It was like a huge barrage of rockets, hundreds of rockets in the air at the same time. And all cities in Israel are protected by the Iron Dome. And many Iron Domes, obviously, Iron Dome interceptors got activated. And it was that familiar view that everyone sees in pictures of, you hear the thud, thud, thud of the interceptions taking place. But many of those rockets did land in the city, which is why we were all rushed into bunkers, and there was a lot of chaos, and people had to, get into their subterranean, those safe houses and stuff. So that's the kind of example of what a saturation firing is really about. Now, even more rudimentary foes of Israel, like the Hamas, are fully aware that the Iron Dome is a difficult system. It can send lots of missiles into the air to hit your rockets, and then what's the point of firing? Which is why they fire hundreds, which basically is an attempt to overwhelm the Iron Dome. You're trying to put so many rockets into the air at the same time. You're kind of saturating the airspace in such a way that the Iron Dome system is completely jammed. There's only a certain number of rockets that the Iron Dome system can track and intercept at the same time. It can't. I don't know that number, and that number is usually classified. But it's finite. It's a finite number, and if you have more than that number of rockets in the air at the same time, it means that the maximum capacity of rockets that can be intercepted will be destroyed, but the remaining will find their targets. And therefore, saturation firing is something that Israel's enemies have always used ever since the Iron Dome came into being, because otherwise you're just sending stuff into the air to see it getting shot down by the Iron Dome. In Iran's case, they basically did the same thing, except with much more sophisticated weaponry. They weren't using short-range rockets. They were using long-range ballistic missile, medium to long-range ballistic missiles, as well as some hypersonic weapons, like we were talking about. Now, very quickly, and we've discussed this before, the Israeli air defense bubble, in internet illustrations, they love illustrating it like a bubble over a country. But it actually is like that. An air defense shield is basically like a protective bubble over a country. Like, think of it like 3 or 4 concentric bubbles around Israel, right? The outermost bubble is the Arrow 3, which is an anti-missile system that is capable of intercepting enemy ballistic missiles out to ranges of if I'm not mistaken, in excess of 2,000 kilometers. Closer to Israel, you've got the bubble, which is the Arrow 2, which is medium-range ballistic missiles can be hit with the Arrow 2. Then the next bubble, which is even closer to Israel, is the David Sling. The David Sling is built to intercept medium-range ballistic missiles and maybe even some cruise missiles. And the last line of defense is the Iron Dome. And that's the reason why people can actually see it. When an arrow system is intercepting an enemy ballistic missile out at 2,000 kilometers, I'm not going to be able to take a video of that with my mobile phone because it's happening way far away from me. The reason why Iron Dome is visible to anyone with a mobile phone in Israel can see the Iron Dome in action, because the Iron Dome is your last bubble. That's your bubble right outside your city. That's getting activated as a last line of defense. Also remember that these bubbles are concentric, which means that, and we've discussed this in that episode on air defense in the Indian context, which is that if one of these bubbles fails, another bubble can get activated in order to try and stop it. Now, if a weapon manages to penetrate all these bubbles, then it has succeeded in hitting its target. Now, the fact is, Israel claims that 99% of these missiles were intercepted. There were some media reports that said that all the missiles were intercepted, which is usually impossible. But Iran obviously knew that with such a sophisticated layered air defense system, which is Arrow 3, Arrow 2, David's Sling, and Iron Dome, and maybe even some anti-aircraft guns on the ground, there's no way that Iran was going to be able to hit any targets unless it had like hundreds of these missiles in the air at the same time. Same formula, same concept, same rationale as what the Hamas did with their rockets. Get as many of these missiles as you can into the air at the same time, and Israel's air defense will be completely jammed. It'll be looking at all these missiles at the same time, prioritizing destroying some of them, and therefore missing some of the others, which will be able to get through. And it's very, very likely that in this kind of scenario, Iran would have, which it ultimately did, fire a mix of conventional missiles and hypersonic missiles. So your Arrow systems and your David Sling would probably be, too busy shooting down the conventional missiles, leaving the Fattah 2 to just zoom in and hit their targets, which is possibly what happened. Now, we don't know whether any of the Fattah 2 missiles were intercepted. Highly unlikely because they are hypersonic. But it's a clear demonstration that Iran understands what air defense capabilities Israel has and acted accordingly.
Right. On the topic of air defense, this is a part that we skipped in our episode when we spoke about India's air defense, because I think we wanted to keep it separate, was the ballistic missile defense system of India's. Again, could not find a lot about it online because I think I could only find PIB releases over a span of few years when they're just like giving out updates on there was some test done successful, some test done successful, nothing much more than that. Very boilerplate statements, but it has been acknowledged. What I've managed to gather is that you have the Prithvi air defense system and you have the advanced air defense system. I think it's also known as the Ashwin air defense system, if I'm not wrong. I think the missile used in that is called Ashwin, if I'm not wrong. You can obviously correct me.
If we get into the number of names that the DRDO has for its different weapons and systems, including double names, we'll be here all night.
Right. And I think it's basically a sort of a two-tied system where you have one system that can take down a missile outside the atmosphere while the other can take it down inside the atmosphere, within the atmosphere. Tell us about India's ballistic missile defense.
So you're right. There's very little, detailed information about India's ballistic missile defense system, or BMD system. And I'm not surprised about that because it has been a work in progress for a long time. As you rightly said, it's a phased multi-tiered anti-missile ballistic missile defense system, which is slightly different from a air defense system, as it were, but it functions theoretically in pretty much the same way. In this particular case, there are two layers. There is work that's going on a third layer as well, but the current layers basically look at being a shield against incoming long-range and medium-range ballistic missiles and long-range cruise missiles as well. The Prithvi air defense missile looks to take out incoming missiles that are exo-atmospheric, which means outside the atmosphere, which basically means your ballistic missiles. The endo-atmospheric, which is inside Within the atmosphere is your advanced air defense or AAD missile. It has a number of different names. We don't know which one is the correct one, Ashwin or otherwise. But basically, these are the two interceptor weapons that are part of the BMD. I do know that more interceptors of different varieties, because look, your enemy weapons are going to be of many different types. You can have intermediate range ballistic missiles. You can have long range cruise missiles. You can have short range ballistic missiles. You can have hybrid missiles, which have MIRV technology, etc. So the Indian ballistic missile defense shield needs to basically cater to all of these incoming missile threats. As I understand it, Dave, India's BMD is already active. It's been deployed. Whatever is ready is already deployed, which means that we already have that bubble around cities, sensitive installations, and things like that. So as and when new layers get developed and proven, they'll be added to it. The beauty of a BMD system is it's not like you've got to develop all the technologies and only then deploy it. You can do it in phases because each one of them is like an independent weapon. So it's like just adding more and more layers to that bubble then.
One final point on this episode, kind of a mix of both of what we just spoke about when it comes hypersonic missiles and missile defense systems, air defense systems, etc. The question and the call of shooting down a missile, a nuclear missile, that is the one I want to discuss, and not just any missile. Let's take the example of India, where you have the Strategic Forces Command, which have all the civilian control, basically, of all of India's nuclear assets when it comes to the matters of defense and the military. So the call to fire a nuclear missile, whether it's from air, land, sea, or underwater, it lies with the civilian government with the government of India, right? When you have an incoming nuclear missile, because the reason I took the example of India is because, I don't want to go into the topic of the doctrines of other countries and, how would Iran, for example, deal with the threat of an incoming nuclear missile? How would Israel deal with it and stuff like that? India is clearer because we know where the control is of nuclear assets. You have an incoming nuclear missile. You could take it down outside the atmosphere. You may take it on inside the atmosphere. Now, to me, what the obvious question is, you don't know what happens when a nuclear missile explodes in the air, because that is not something you've tested. All the nuclear testing that has happened so far has happened under earth. So the question, the call to take down a missile that you think is nuclear, first of all, how do you even identify a nuclear missile compared to like a ballistic missile or a supersonic missile that it has a nuclear warhead? And if you think it has, the call to take it down, does that also then lie in that domain of, it is a strategic decision and not then a matter of defense?
When a missile is in the air, there is a very, very, very clear laid down protocol. It's not like somebody's going to be running with a file asking for signatures in order to approve and get no objection certificates for that missile to be shut down. Air defense of India is the 100% preserve of the Indian Air Force.
Right.
They take care of all air defense. There is a clear protocol for any incoming foreign object, projectile of any kind, and the Air Force doesn't need civilian clearance to engage with and destroy anything deemed to be a threat to the country that's coming from the air. So let's be very clear about that. Nuclear, non-nuclear, it doesn't matter. The Air Force doesn't need to call the Prime Minister or somebody else in order to get it down. Hopefully, when something is coming at us, first of all, let's hope nothing comes at us. But hopefully, if and when something comes at us, we have the technology, the intelligence, and the sensors to be able to give us an advanced sense of whether it's nuclear or non-nuclear. You're right; it's a very important issue about your ballistic missile defense system taking down a nuclear weapon. But the priority will always be to make sure the damn thing doesn't hit your land. It's as simple as that. Okay, but this once again brings me back to a question that I constantly come to, and I find myself coming to in every episode, which is that if you've got a nuclear warhead screaming towards you, then you've already crossed the line of shit. Should I shoot it down in the air or should I wait till it hits Chandni Chowk? Shit has already hit the fan if a nuclear weapon is heading towards you, right? So in that case, the fine line between a massive nuclear explosion somewhere in the air, maybe over the Arabian Sea or somewhere, or in your airspace, is going to be a decision that will be taken by the Air Force or the Strategic Forces Command, whoever is in that position. Because remember, by the time a nuclear weapon is in the air, there will have had to be some kind of a big lead up to that kind of escalation, which means many emergency protocols will come into place. There will be evacuation of cities. There will be, movement of the military in different ways, in such a way that to mitigate the possible fallout of exactly the kind of scenario that you're talking about. But believe me, it's not like that people will be confused when something like this happens. And to close that point, and I love making this point because I've made it so many times, which is that if a nuclear weapon is coming at you, it means that your entire political system, your entire military has failed. That's all it means. So, you've got bigger problems than worrying about anything else if you've got a nuclear weapon coming at you. It means deterrence has failed.
Yeah. The last part of what you said, that kind of brought back the memory of the third of Christopher Nolan's Batman movie, where you have the question of, do you want that bomb to explode in Gotham City, or do you want Batman to kind of fly it out into the ocean and let it explode and see what happens there? Right. And I'm kind of losing count of the number of times we end up reaching points, hypothetical points, where shit has hit the fan in this world. But seeing as the conflicts that are happening right now, seeing as how this week has been, I think it is best that it has to be discussed, and I think this podcast is a very good platform for that. And I see it in comments, by the way. People do appreciate us talking about subjects like these, and they do take a good interest. So thanks Shiv, for that. Thanks for your insight as always on this episode and all the episodes that we've had over the course of 42 episodes. And thanks also again to our listeners and viewers with your comments and your insights. It just kind of gives us new ideas and new sort of, gives us thoughts about what can we explore more on this podcast. Thanks as always to our producer Anna Priyadashini. That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries with the passport. Bye-bye.